So normally we talk a little business, but today's a little different. We want to let Garret eat on his salad for a minute, so whenever he's ready, we'll let him get up here. But we're grateful to have him today. The commercials are outstanding. My kids love them. They laugh every time they see the hashtag stupid. So whoever's doing that for you is working. So without further ado, we're going to turn the floor over to Congressman Graves. Thank you so much.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to be back. In regard to the commercials, we were. I guess I got to watch I see these cameras there, so I'm going to watch about incriminating myself. But we may or may not have been really standing on the interstate.
Green screen, yeah.
And if we weren't there, or even if we weren't, you probably can imagine the urgency of wanting to just get it done and get back out real quick. And so there wasn't a script, there wasn't anything. It was just blah, and that's kind of how it happened. But so we represent 13 parishes, and we represent about 800,000 people. You think about that for just a minute. We represent 13 parishes and about 800,000 people. In your job, in your different job, whether you're a realtor, you're a banker, you work in the healthcare field, you're an attorney, it's pretty clear oftentimes in those positions what your priority is. If you work in healthcare, it's that your priority is that person right in front of you, trying to help address the healthcare problem that they have. If you're an attorney, it's working for your client and helping to address whatever legal issue they have. If you're an accountant, it's taking your client's tax returns or all their filings and helping to file something with it, taking all their documents and helping to file a tax return with the IRS. If you're a realtor, it's about selling a house or it's about connecting a buyer with a house. Say it again, we represent 13 parishes and 800,000 people. Now think for just a minute if I came and I said, all right, folks, here we go. Do y'all want to have lunch at Big Mike's, or do you want to go to James Grill, or or do you want to go over to La Carreta? People in this group right here, y'all are going to have a difference of opinion, right? You're going to have a difference of opinion. You want to go to BRQ, or do you want to come to Big Mike's next week? Raise your hand if you want to go to BRQ. Raise your hand if you want to go to Big Mike's. You're going to have a difference of opinion in this very room. You can even distill it down to your very family. And you can get home tonight and you can say, hey honey, hey kids, whoever's at home, and you can say, hey, let's go out to eat tonight. And where do y'all want to go? And folks are going to say different things. And that's in your own family among people that you love, right? And so people have different opinions, different approaches, different priorities. But when you take that and you balloon it out to 800,000 people, it makes it pretty hard to do this job sometimes. I wish, and I can't tell you how much I wish, that every time we had a bill come up or an issue that arose, that all 800,000 people we represented had the same position. We all want you to vote yes, we all want you to vote no, we all want you to say this, but that doesn't happen. And so what we do, and we spend a lot of time doing it, is doing things just like this, where we go meet with people and try and talk about different issues and try and figure out how do we get to a place of consensus? How do we communicate and understand your concerns, your ideas, your criticism, and your priorities to where we can take all 800,000 people and try and figure out how to distill that to a top 10 list that we can be working on. And I'll tell you, even before the flood we had in August, one of the things that people talked to us about a lot was infrastructure issues, whether it was flood infrastructure or it was transportation infrastructure. We heard about it a lot, strong concerns there. We heard concerns nationally about jobs and just the federal government not necessarily complimenting or working with us, undermining U.S. businesses, small businesses, and their ability to compete on a global level. We heard a lot about the amount of time that people sit in traffic and just the frustration there. We heard a lot about immigration and the concerns about immigration and distinguishing a border between the United States and Mexico and other countries. And so I want to tell you a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing over the past 2 years, the things that we've been doing, responding to all of those priorities and the issues we've been working on that y'all have identified. Number one, and the commercial that you noted. You know, the Washington Street exit, it's been there for 50 years. For 50 years, that whole configuration, that funneling of traffic. Hey, I've got a great idea. I'm going to take 4 lanes and we're going to funnel it down to 1. It's going to be awesome. I mean, that was an awful idea, and it was done, and now we're dealing with the repercussions of it. But it's been there for 50 years, and you know what? Y'all identified it. People, and this was something that people just said, hey, look, we've got to fix this. You know what? The solution's under construction right now, and it's being fixed. And one of the things that I think is most offensive about it, the solution's $8.8 million. It's not like it was this, oh gosh, it's $2 billion, how are we going to do this? It was $8.8 million. But the good news is, look, it's under construction, it's being fixed. All right? It's under construction right now, the solution. Number 2, we talk about the silliness of why in the world are we coming in like after our August 2016 flood and spending $12 billion picking up the pieces, instead of on the front end saying, hey, what can we do to help make ourselves more flood proof, protect our community, make our communities more resilient? Because usually the most expensive, from a monetary perspective, the most expensive thing we own is our house. And so it's not like you can pick up your house and move it like you can your car. The house is a static structure and it's there. We've got to protect it. And so making sure that we're not spending billions after a flood like the $12 billion, but leaning forward and identifying those vulnerabilities, identifying those areas where we need flood protection. And so just like the Washington Street exit has been around for 50 years, the West Shore project, which is a hurricane protection project, it was stuck in the Corps process for 42 years being studied, 42 years. Finally, in December of 16, we got it authorized for construction. And we came and announced a few months ago full funding, all $760 million for that now 44-year-old project. The Comite project, and something 2 people mentioned it walking in here to us about. The Comite project, it's been around for 32 years. 32 years it's been around. And that project is now fully funded, almost $400 million. And I want to be clear, we didn't wait for the flood to happen. We started working on these things well before the flood happened. It increased funding tenfold for that project alone. Baton Rouge area flood control, 21 years it's been around, $255 million. It is now fully funded for construction. So look, my point is that what is this job? This job is representing y'all, and it's hard sometimes. You're hard people to represent. No, seriously. You can imagine just in your own family, as I tried to communicate earlier, your own family trying to decide, here's what we want to do. We want to go to La Coretta. We want to go to BRQ. It's hard to come up with 1 or 2 things that everybody agrees that you need to be focused on and you need to prioritize in this job. But what we've done is by meeting with thousands and thousands of people, we've been able to kind of develop this consensus list. We've been able to step in and fix stupid on the Washington Street exit. We've been able to fix stupid on the West Shore project, on the Comite project, on the Baton Rouge area flood control project. And all these things are moving forward now. But you know what? Everybody can sit around and say, oh, this is great. We're fixing Comite. We'll pat ourselves in the back. We're going to be flood proof. You know what? Comite was designed for 1983. Think about 1983. What did this place look like in 1983? It didn't look like it looks today. We're about to be stupid again. And what I mean by that is that we can't stop on 83. That's not where we need to be. We need to be planning for 2033. We need to be planning for the future. We need to recognize since 1983, we've had extraordinary growth in this area. We've had a lot of development in homes and roads and shopping centers and things like that. And so in addition to the $1.4 billion that we were able to secure for all those projects that I mentioned, we have another $1.6 billion to address additional flood protection projects. To make sure, for example, right now, they're doing work on the Pitfall, they're doing work on West Coyal, they're doing work on, what was the other one? Natalbany. Right now, they're actually going through and cleaning out the rivers, the bayous, the ditches, making sure that water can efficiently flow. We can get it out of our neighborhoods and ultimately out to the Gulf of Mexico where we want it. That work's going on right now. But again, $1.6 billion in other projects we're going to identify to make sure that we're not prepared for 1983, we're prepared for the future. We're prepared for what's going to happen, for additional storms, for additional development and growth. Because that's what our job is. Our job is to represent. Our job is to make sure that we can be as flood-proof as we can. Our job is to make sure that flood insurance rates don't make owning a home unaffordable, which unfortunately is the trajectory that we're on. So now that we've secured the funds, we're working on identifying those next projects that we're going to spend the $1.6 billion on to take us a step further, even better flood protection. Our job now is to make sure that the funds that are there, the total of $3 billion, are executed in a way that delivers us flood protection. Our job is to make sure that the priorities here are fully represented. And at the local level, I talked about a lot of the things that we've been working on. At the national level, we've got a lot going on there too. And you can turn on MSNBC or Fox or CNN and you probably see a whole bunch of explosive things on TV and people arguing and all that. But you know what? In addition to all those wins, and look, I can't tell you how exciting it is to take projects that are 50 years old, 44 years old, 32 years old, 21 years old, and be able to get those things done. Projects that were conceived before I was born, and we're actually getting them fixed now. That's awesome. But at the national level, this government has a responsibility to help work with you, to help complement your lives and complement your goals and help you to achieve the American dream, not get in the way of it. But if you look at some of the things that your own government has done in recent years, you really got to question, are they working with me and for me, or are they working against me? And again, you look at TV and you see all this divisiveness going on, and you're not real sure what actually is happening in Washington. Let me give you a few statistics about things that are happening right now that are a result of national policy changes that I think are affecting every single American, including all of you in this room. Number one, you heard all this talk about ISIS, right? You remember that, all the talk about ISIS? You know that ISIS has been reduced down to nearly 1% of the footprint where they were before. Nearly 1%. But we've been able to help to take different policies, different approaches from a military perspective, emboldening some of the military leaders on the ground and helping to contain and compress ISIS. They're not totally gone, but got them down to about 1% of the land area where they were before. 1%. The VA. You remember the VA debacle where our veterans, particularly at the hospital in Arizona, were being mistreated? You all remember that? Where they literally were taking appointment requests and people they know that had terminal diseases and others and were just throwing the files out and not even following up or acting on treatment and other things that these people needed? You know how many people lost their job as a result of that? 0. No one lost their job. No one. Think about in your job if you could just kick back, put your feet on the desk, and never ever be held accountable to do anything. How much work would get done? Not a whole lot. And in this case, you were sending entirely the wrong message to the VA employees. Here are our heroes, the people that have defended our nation, have put every single thing on the line, their families sacrificing, and we're treating them that way, and we're establishing a culture at the VA where that's okay? Come on. And so we changed laws and we changed policies, and do you know that 1,200 VA employees have been fired? 500 more have been suspended or otherwise disciplined. 200 have been demoted. Making sure that we establish the culture of accountability at the VA, where these federal government employees are actually being responsive and being held accountable and treating our veterans with the respect and giving them the service that they deserve. And in terms of opportunities for us, do you know that right now that there are actually more jobs available in the United States than there are people looking for work? And just last month, 250,000 new jobs. Just last month, 250,000 new jobs. Unemployment rate is at a rate that is the lowest it's been in my entire lifetime. And if you're a veteran, we're at about a 25-year low. If you have a GED, we're at about a 25-year low. If you're a woman, we're at about a 65-year low for unemployment, the unemployment rate for women. And you hear all these people and all these divisive news stations and everything talk about how, oh, well, this is just helping rich white people, it's just helping large corporations. Really? You heard those statistics I just gave you? Let me give you a few more. If you're an African American, we have the lowest unemployment rate in American history. Hispanic American, lowest unemployment rate in American history. Asian American, lowest unemployment rate in American history. We've actually been able to transition 3.9 million people, 3.9 million from food stamps into the workforce in the last 18 months. These are things that are benefiting every single American. We've seen the largest wage growth in about 10 years. Wages have increased about 3.3% over the past year. We have over 90% of Americans have larger paychecks today adjusted for inflation as compared to last. This is what our government's supposed to be doing. So how are we doing it? Well, number one, we stepped in and reformed the tax code because our tax code was 31 years old. There's not a person in here who's using a business plan, a family budget, a strategy that's 31 years old. No one is. We've updated things. We've looked around with our businesses, our companies, our jobs and said, what are the competitors doing? How can I provide better services to our employees or to our customers, our clients? And you adapt, you adjust, you improve efficiency. You look at the market and you make changes. We hadn't adjusted in 31 years. We had countries like Ireland in some cases charging corporate tax rates that were 1/3 of us in the United States. 1/3. How long are these large companies going to keep a presence in the US when they can go to Ireland to pay 1/3 of the cost? So we've updated that. We've changed the tax code to where individuals get to keep a larger portion of their hard-earned money. Number two, on regulations. Stepping in and saying, you know what? Regulations cost money to comply with. They do at home and they do at work. And so stepping in and saying, look, we need regulations, but how do we update them or modernize them in a way that reflects new technology, that reflects better business practices, that reflects current markets? So for every one new regulation that's been issued in the last 2 years, 24 have been rescinded. 24 regulations rescinded for every one new one issued. Helping to, once again, lower compliance costs, helping us to compete more, better on a level playing field with global businesses. And number three, the last thing, is taking a look at all these trade agreements and determining which provisions were unfair and stepping in and adjusting them, renegotiating them. And that means if Canada ultimately is trying to put a 300% tariff on our dairy products, a 300% tariff when you actually add everything up, how in the world can an American farmer compete if when they send something in it's a 300% tariff? How do you do that? And then when they send it back, send us something, there's nothing on it? Or if we send a car to China and they're gonna add a 100% tariff, how do you compete with Chinese-made vehicles? And so stepping in and looking at the unfair trade practices or provisions in these agreements that are unfair, that is exactly what our government is supposed to be doing for us, representing us, not in a way that makes it unfair and helps to bolster Canadian dairy farmers or Chinese auto manufacturers, but stands up and represents us. And so you know what? I am very glad that this president challenged the Canadian and the Mexican agreements and addressing some of the unfair provisions in there. And you know what? We've renegotiated. We have an agreement now. And with Japan, stepping in and challenging some of the unfair provisions and updating them just like we did our tax code. And the European Union and South Korea. And the big one that's out there is China. And you know what? China is by far the most egregious. There was an analysis that I read a while back that indicated that between 2012 and 2017, we had lost 3.4 million jobs in the United States. Let me say that again. Between 2012 and 2017, we lost 3.4 million jobs in the United States because of how China has stolen our technology, have stolen your ideas, your ingenuity, your processes, your patents. They've stolen it and then turned around, manufactured it themselves, or replicated and sold it back at a cheaper price. 3.4 million jobs in the United States lost. And when you add up all of the things that they've stolen for us over the last several years, we are talking trillions of dollars of economic damages. Some Chinese folks have said, we can't believe it took you this long to challenge us. Stealing our military technology, stealing our communications technology, stealing just American ingenuity ideas and patents that we have worked so hard to develop. And so this president is challenging that. And you know what? There are going to be some changes, and there may even be some short-term pain. But this is exactly what we need our elected leaders, our leadership to do. At the end of the day, I think a good analogy, and something I used to talk about a lot. You know, it's a great indication of how much technology and things have changed over the last several years, right? When we were growing up, iPhone didn't exist. It didn't even exist. And today, the power that's in this thing is greater than computers when we were kids. You literally have more processing and memory power right here than you did when we were kids. And so the private sector has evolved. The private sector has taken advantage of technology. And think about all the things that you can do today that you couldn't do back when you were kids. Whether it's getting into your car and your phone's Bluetooth just automatically syncs with your car, and the maps sync up and your phone calls and everything happens right there on the screen. And you can look on there and say, all right, look, I-12, we got a wreck again, so now I'm gonna take Florida into Baton Rouge or whatever. You got the information right away. And another one that it's just amazing is Amazon. Amazon. So right now, hey, you know what? I want to buy a new tripod for my camera, and boom, it's at my house tomorrow. And I just stood right here and did it. Why is it that our own government can't be that responsive? Why is it that mentally we all just accept the fact that, oh gosh, I got to get my driver's license again, and I'm getting ready to burn 2 hours, and it's going to be awful? Why is it that we accept that there are disparate standards of accountability between how government works and how the private sector works? And stepping in and challenging that very thought that we can have disparity, that we should have disparity, that it's okay, oh, well, it's government, they're just slower. You know, one of the things that distinguishes, or a couple of things that distinguish government from the private sector is this. In the private sector, if you don't compete, if you're not innovative, if you don't offer good services, good response time, to your customers, to your clients, somebody's going to beat you out and you're going to be out of business, right? Government doesn't have that. Government has a monopoly. Government has a monopoly. There's nobody to come in and do that job and say, oh, well, look, if this bureaucrat doesn't do it, then the other bureaucrat's going to do it. No, there's one bureaucrat, and that bureaucrat's the one that does it, period. And so you're losing that incentive or that competition. If I were running a race in the Olympics and I had no one adjacent to me and on the track, and I'm running all by myself, do you think I'm going to set a world record? Or do you think I have a better chance of setting a world record with 9 people adjacent to me, and they're all running, and I'm looking over saying, here he comes, I got to push it harder, I got to try harder, I got to do better. You know good and well that when you're pushed with that competition, you're going to do better. I'll say it again, government doesn't have it. And that's one of the things that distinguishes it from the private sector. And the other thing that distinguishes government from the private sector. It's one of the greatest things about America, and it's one of the things that really distinguishes us from so many other countries, and I also think it's one of the reasons we've become this amazing nation. And it's the fact that we can fulfill the American dream here. It's something other countries, in many cases, aren't allowed to fulfill. And what I mean by that is that hard work, innovation is rewarded here. You can achieve your definition of success, whatever it is, monetary or otherwise. You can achieve your definition of success. You can be rewarded for your hard work. In government, that doesn't really happen. You don't get to reap the profits or gain the cost savings from a new idea or technology. But I'll say it again, it doesn't mean that we should continue to accept the disparity between government performance and private sector performance and services. And so, in closing, I just want to say that that's what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to step up and recognize that a project sitting around and languishing for 50 years, a project logjam for 44 years, a project stuck in a bureaucratic quagmire for 32 years, a project with no progress whatsoever in 21 years. That's not okay. It's not responsive. And if that were happening in the private sector, that company would have gone bankrupt years and years ago. So we have a president, we have at the federal level, we're working to try to represent your best interest and trying to advance your priorities. We're trying to do it efficiently. Locally, we're trying to do the same thing, and I think we've made some progress. The government is actually functioning in a way that I think it's supposed to work. Whether it's stepping in and recognizing that if FEMA's trying to charge Livingston Parish schools $24 million to rebuild their schools, $24 million because of a flawed interpretation of the law, or your own government is coming in and saying that your SBA loan that you got to rebuild your house is duplicative of a grant, and so you can't get a grant because you got a loan. They're duplicative of one another. Our federal government telling us this. Or our federal government telling us that if we're going to appeal FEMA, you go back to the same person that told you no the first time, and 99% of the time they're going to tell you no again. Changing all these things. Or if Sheriff Ard is stepping in and providing trailer housing for his deputies because he didn't have law enforcement after the flood because all of his deputies' families were flooded, homes were flooded, and their deputies were worried about their families. He said, you know what, let me take care of that. I need y'all for law enforcement. So he went and built a trailer park at probably 1/10 the cost of what the federal government was paying. And the federal government said, we're not going to pay you back. What? He just saved you 90% of the money and you're not going to pay him back? We've stepped in and fixed all those things because again, that's how this is supposed to work, and that's how it would be working in the private sector. Every single one of those things and many other things, responsive to the customers, responsive to the needs, updating policies and technologies to actually do what we're supposed to be doing.
You talked about you touched on a couple of points in my question. You talked about the futures. You talked about being preventative of disasters. Can you discuss your committee involvement and the recent Reform Act for the Corps, which you had quite a bit of argument with your first few years in office?
Yeah. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are responsible for the 44, 32, and 21-year-old projects. Across the country, the Corps of Engineers has a $100 billion backlog of projects that have been authorized by Congress for construction but haven't been built yet. $100 billion across all 50 states and the territories. Now, think about it for just a minute. You're in charge of this $100 billion, all right? Think about that. You're in charge of this $100 billion catalog of projects that you've got to deliver. And some of them are hurricane protection or flood control or restoring our coast. Some of them are deepening navigation channels. How much a year would you want to be able to deliver on those projects? And put that number in your head. The number that President Bush and President Obama and President Clinton and President Trump, you know what the number they've asked for? All of these presidents. Somewhere between 1 and 2 billion. Now, I'm not asking you to whip out your calculation and be a math whiz, but you can do the math on that real quick. You get 1 to 2 billion a year, you have a $100 billion backlog, you will finish approximately never. You can't do it. You can't. You don't keep up with inflation, right? And so you're not ever going to get these things done. That's how these projects get stuck. Now, making it even worse, a lot of these projects, they shouldn't cost cumulatively $100 billion. If you actually stepped in and you began applying kind of an engineering value analysis, you probably could get these costs down significantly. When I built these projects, with 2 jobs back is what I did, we routinely built them for 1/3 to 1/2 the cost of the Corps. So here's what we've done. Because of that $100 billion across the country, 32 billion of them are right here at home. 32 billion, a third of those projects across the nation are right here at home in Louisiana. Hurricane, flood protection, and coastal restoration, and navigation channels. Number one, why is it that the agency in charge of this is in the Department of Defense? If you were the Secretary of Defense and you were responsible for North Korea, Syria, China, Iran, Russia, aircraft carriers, intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarines, F-35s, and wetlands permits. What ranks where in regard to priorities? And COMET project. What ranks where in regard to priorities? Look, I'm not criticizing Secretary of Defense. What I'm saying is that he or she appropriately is going to put every single one of those things as a higher priority. We can't, this mission is so critical to our nation and so critical to Louisiana, we can't have it as priority number 163. We've got to have it as priority number 1, 2, and 3. So what we've done in the bill the President signed into law on Tuesday last week is this. We begin a process to migrate the Corps of Engineers out of the Department of Defense and put it in a civilian agency where this mission can be the most important thing that they do. Where that cabinet secretary isn't going and fighting for dollars and got to decide between, should I fight for another aircraft carrier or do I get more money to issue wetland permits? where this is the mission, this is the party. Where the cabinet secretary knows, well, let me tell you what's going on, Mr. Chairman, on the Comey project. Where the secretary knows, the cabinet official knows, that this project, we're going to have it built in 3 years and it's going to cost this much. Because this is a critical mission. We've got to stop the stupidity in this nation of spending billions after a disaster rather than millions before. We put provisions in the bill that say that if Livingston Parish wants to be the leader on that project, and they receive the federal funds, and they administer the project, if the Amy River Basin Commission, if the state of Louisiana wants to be the leader on that project, they can do that under the law. And not just that, but one of these crazy things that just doesn't make any sense. In order to get a project authorized by Congress, you have to go through all of the regulatory compliance, your environmental, economic, technical, all of it has to be done before you can go to Congress for approval. But if we give the money to Livingston Parish and they carry the project out, they have to do that all over again. They have to go through the regulatory again, they have to go through all the hoops again to get regulatory compliance and permitting. We changed the law, so that doesn't make any sense. If it's been done, it's been done. Let them use it just like the Corps does. And so we changed that in the law. Look, many other things in there, but bottom line is that that bill begins this transformation from the Corps we have to the Corps we need.
There's a HR 2849 penalty for early retirement withdrawal. Did that pass?
So what he's talking about is that there's a provision in the law that was added in 1977. There were some updates in 1982. Two different ones. One of them's called windfall elimination provision, and the other one's called the government pension offset. And effectively, if you are or were a public employee, you were a teacher, you were a firefighter, police officer, some type of public employee in Louisiana, and at one point up to about 25 other states, you paid into an alternative to Social Security. And so what happened is when they changed these laws in the 1970s and early 1980s, they effectively reduced your Social Security benefits. Now let me give you a scenario. We ran through some numbers when we were testifying before the committee, where if you were a police officer, no, what was it? If you were a security guard, I think it was for 20 years, a security guard, and then you went and became a police officer for 10 years, you would get a reduction, and I think it was like $1,200 a month in your Social Security benefits because you did both public and private work, public and private service. Don't quote me on the number, I need to go back and look at my calculations, but basically you were going to be penalized on Social Security because you went and became a police officer. If you had just stayed a security guard and then just retired, you would get more money than if you actually went back and kept working and paid taxes as a police officer later. And so we offered an amendment to a tax bill to try to get that changed, because it's been around forever, it's unfair, and it penalizes people like police officers and teachers that we don't need to be penalizing, we need to be lifting them up. They ultimately rejected our amendment, but in the House you have a two-step process. You have to get approval to offer your amendment, and then you actually have to get your amendment voted on. They refused to allow us to offer our amendment. However, in our advocacy for that amendment, we reached an agreement with the chairman of the committee that he was going to offer a bill to solve this problem. He did it. He filed the bill. I don't remember the bill number, it's HR 6000 something. Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas. He's the chairman of the committee. I got to tell you, somebody like Chairman Brady has so much more stroke on this issue than I do. You want him leading this thing. And so the fact that he agreed to do that, he's filed the bill, he said he's going to try and move it this year, and if he can't, he's going to do it next year. But I know that you want to hear that this thing passed and it's law today, but here's the deal. This has been around since the 1970s, late 1970s, early 1980s. We're in the best spot we've been in since then, right now, by him agreeing to do this. So it's not law yet, but he's introduced the bill. It's not a perfect fix, but it does a giant leap in the right direction, and we're continuing to work with him to get this across the goal line.
HR 6933. HR 6933.
6933, HR 6933. We say it again, it's not perfect, but it is a step in the direction, a giant leap, and much better than where we are today. Yes.
4 weeks from today, the 4-month extension of the NFIP expires. What is the future of it? What do you see happening with the next renegotiation of that bill?
Yeah. So the flood insurance program is something that we've been battling on a good bit. I've given several speeches on the House floor against some of the legislation that other House Republicans have been proposing. Been working closely with a coalition of people from New Jersey, from Florida, from Texas, and Missouri and other states. Because what was proposed in the House was a bill that effectively was going to raise insurance premiums, flood insurance premiums, to $10,000 a year for many of our residents, and it was going to be adjusted for inflation annually after that. So $10,000 wasn't the cap; it was going to keep going up each year. Look, in many cases, we don't know how much of our mortgage check is going in. Principal, interest, home insurance, flood insurance, taxes. What we know is we know how much that check is, how much we're writing. And so if a larger portion of that check has to go to your flood insurance payment, effectively, it undermines your ability to buy a more expensive house. And so, number one. Number two, we drain right here from Montana to New York to 2 Canadian provinces. It's one of the largest watersheds in the world. So when they build more things, and they build more roads and houses and parking lots and developments, guess what happens here? We get more water because they're building, so they channel the water into the rivers and streams and everything else. It goes to the Mississippi River. It comes down to our watershed. So that's why we're getting more water on the Mississippi River system. We're getting more water. And that's why we've had more high water events in recent years than we've ever had. Number two, we've lost 2,000 square miles of our coast. 2,000 square miles. So the Gulf of Mexico is that much closer. It's, we've had flooding, and we had the flooding in 2011, and we had flooding in 2016, obviously. Some of that is related to the coast, to the loss of the coast, the Gulf of Mexico being that much closer to us. Now, we didn't do a dang thing to deserve more water. That's other people's decisions in the upper basin, but it affects us, and it makes us more vulnerable to flooding. We largely didn't do anything to cause the coast to erode. That was the federal government's actions, but we're the ones more vulnerable. So the federal government is trying to charge us higher flood insurance rates because of what other people are doing to us. That's not fair. It's not right. So we have done two things. Number one, we've brought $3 billion in new flood protection funds because we believe you shouldn't just have a flood insurance program that's defensive or reactive. You've got to have an offensive as well. Step in and help to provide better protection to where you don't have outrageous flood insurance rates. But number two, in the flood insurance bill, we've tried to add provisions that have said, look, you can charge us actuarial rates. I mean, rates that truly assess the risk that our home or our business is exposed to. However, actuarial means things that we have caused our home or business to be exposed to, not things that are out of our control. If we made bad decisions and built 3 feet below base flood elevation, if we made bad decisions and built our home in a creek, duh, you need to be responsible for that. But you can't charge us for things that other people have done to us. And so the chairman of the committee, Jim Henschling from Texas, has been incredibly challenging to work with. He looks at the flood insurance program on a spreadsheet, says it's in the red, which is a really distorted view of the program. And so he's just trying to raise rates. I've said, number one, we've got to bring an offense to the table and start protecting some of these areas and not just charging higher rates. Number two, I've said that you can't charge people for things that they're not responsible for. Number three, we've said that you've got to allow for more private sector involvement. For example, if you have a neighborhood, I'm going to make up a scenario, a neighborhood or a community, a basin, is cumulatively paying $10 million a year in flood insurance payments. And there's a $20 million pump station or canal or levee you can build that will cut those people's risk in half, which means instead of paying $10 million a year, they can pay $5 million. Here's what you do. You say, all right, if you want to have a private sector investor come in, let them build the $20 million levee. Let them reduce our flood insurance rates cumulatively from $10 million to $8 million. Therefore, we're getting a 20% reduction. They go ahead and pocket money until they pay for themselves. They pay themselves back for that $20 million. You end up with protection that's occurred in the short term. You have an investor that's been able to generate a profit. And we have lower flood insurance rates in a more resilient community. And so we've brought a number of ideas like that to the table and continuing to work with folks. John, here's my my hope is that we're able to kick this can down the road one more time, because Chairman Henserling's is term limited and will be out of the job in January, and I'd rather negotiate with somebody else. So. What else? Ideas, criticism? Yeah. You got excited about criticism, I saw that.
Yeah. Well, you just talked about term limits. You want to go on the record with a feeling on whether or not term limits are a good or a bad thing?
Yeah, I have a mixed feeling about it. So on the one hand, I think that term limits come up every 2 years. Voters are the ones who decide. And you know what? For folks that are incumbents, for people like me that have been in this job, I actually have a record that you can look at. And you can look at my record and you can say, all right, he or she has done things that have actually helped, or you know what, they haven't. They've delivered on their promises, they haven't. They've progressed our community, they haven't. But you have other people that can come in and say, you know what, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna do that, but there's nothing you can evaluate them on. So I think in some cases, incumbents have a little bit harder time because they actually have a flat-out record that you can evaluate, that you can score a grade. Voters have the option every 2 years in the House of Representatives to give someone a term limit. So on the one hand, I think that term limits to some degree exist. Number two, one of the things that I've realized is that there are people in the Congress that absolutely should be term limited. And some of those people, within the first few months of getting there, should be term limited. And I mean, it's amazing. These people get there, and some of the things they start doing and saying, and they get totally sucked up in the DCC. And it's like, all right, you need to go. Your time to go. And you get other people, and I will tell you, there are people that have been there for over 20 years that I believe still work really hard to represent their states, that bleed their states, that don't have other motives or other things that are motivating their decisions. They're doing it for their people, they're doing it for their states. And so I don't think there's a clean formula. Like I said, I think some people, 2 months, they need to be out. Other people, I've seen them there 20 years, and I think they're actually doing a good job representing their states. But ultimately, in this district, term limits are something that if you do a poll, people are going to say we should have term limits. So I would represent the consensus or the majority of people in our district if that vote were to come up. But I'll tell you some change I would try and make in that. After being there now for 3.5 years or so, there's one thing I've found. A lot of the problem is actually within the bureaucrats. It's within the agencies, or some people call it the deep state. Now, I'm not going to go that far, but I'll just say that there is unbelievable resistance within some of these agencies to make change. You know, I talked about this and the difference between the private sector and government agencies and bureaucrats. They don't want to change. They don't want to evolve, progress, or do things differently. And if you're, and look, the federal government is so complex, so huge, so complicated, all the acronyms and budgets and the way things are funded and hidden and everything else. If you just term limit members of Congress and you don't term limit the bureaucrats, you're further empowering the bureaucrats with superior knowledge over the elected officials that are representing you. And that's a concern because, you know, look, the things that I've learned in the 3.5 years, I've learned a lot. I've learned an awful lot. But I'll also tell you that if I'm going toe-to-toe with the person that runs that program, that's been running that program for 20 years, they're probably going to school me. And so we got to be real careful about giving some of these, and I don't mean to be overly stereotypical, but you got to be real careful about giving some of these 20-year bureaucrats, who in many cases are very recalcitrant and resistant to change, giving them the hand up or the leg up with the knowledge over these folks that are just coming in and maybe wanting to make change, but without the understanding or knowledge to actually do it. So you're going to term limit members of Congress. You need to term limit some of these bureaucrats as well to prevent these agencies from becoming so institutionalized and so superior and able to outflank the elected officials, the representatives. Yeah.
Last question. Final score tomorrow and your best Ogeron boys.
LSU's going to win by 2.
Win by 2.
LSU's going to win by 2.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
What? Was that TW or TO? That's what I'm trying to see.
Any other questions, comments, ideas, suggestions?
Got one more.
Yeah.
The mitigation grant that was passed, $68 million was put in on that for 2016 for our area, not for North Louisiana, but for here.
Yeah.
68 million. The last deadline after 2 or 3 extensions, if I'm right, was November 30th of 2017. Was the last deadline to file.
No, they
for
did an
mitigation.
extension. Paul, HMGP, you
March
remember that?
31st,
What is-
2018.
What is it?
March 31st, 2018 was the final one.
No, they did a, do you remember?
Oh,
they-
wait, yeah. but-
November
No, it was
30th.
August, I'm sorry. There were 3 tiered, there was one in the first quarter, one in the mid-quarter, and then the final parishes had until, I believe, August, maybe July or August.
I think there was one more extension to where there's a November, I think a November 15th or 13th deadline.
30th.
The 30th? Okay. Well, in any case, so just real quick, overall, there was $300 million in flood mitigation dollars through the hazard mitigation grant from FEMA. East Baton Rouge got 112, Livingston got 68, Ascension got 32. So those funds are sort of allocated to Livingston Parish.
Right.
They have to submit their plan that FEMA then has to approve. So what, your question is, when are the funds going to come?
So my question is, what I've read on this is that they take 9 to 12 months to make their determination on which ones go through and which ones are denied. That period would be the end of this month. So is that the case, November 30th of this month?
I got to tell you,
Are they going to send out an acceptance, or are they
Yeah.
going to send out a denial?
we were somewhat frustrated because these funds were locked in back in December of 16. They were locked in December of 16, this 300 million.
Yeah, because I filed this thing in October
Yeah.
of 16 when they put out that you could file for it.
Yeah.
And then told me for a year straight, well, you had filed it too early.
Yeah.
But they told me to file it.
Well, so I'm
So I
not,
went to a FEMA tent, filled it out, and they said, well, you're a year too early.
so are you trying to get an elevation, a buyout?
Well, it
What do
was
you?
an elevation or acquisition
Yeah.
on my house, which is 2 foot below BFE,
Okay,
flooded,
yep.
2 foot, and so it was either or. So that, there we are.
So you want to
it's
figure out
2
where we are in
year-
approval?
2 years now.
Yeah. I can tell you is number one, we have been talking with FEMA probably 20 times about how long it's taking them to come through and approve these dollars. Number two, we did put a provision in the law that the president signed in about 3 weeks ago that gives more flexibility in the HMGP dollars, gives more flexibility to state and parishes on what they can use the money for. Number four, we're working on new policies that would give more discretion to the state and parishes to where FEMA doesn't come in and spend 9 months or even 2 months sitting there scrutinizing all of these plans. What we've tried to do is look at it a different way to where states have to submit what's called a hazard mitigation plan on the front end. You have to do this well before, or you can do what's called an enhanced hazard mitigation plan, where you can actually get more money. So we've tried to get FEMA, instead of coming in and waiting for a flood to happen and then taking several months or even a year or years to approve the use of dollars, instead having a pre-approved plan that a state submits, and they say, okay, here are the things we want to do to make our community more resilient. Maybe it's buying out homes or lifting homes in some areas. Maybe it's building a pump station, a canal, clearing and snagging different waterways. And once the funds become available, like in December of 2016, you don't have to ask permission to do anything that's in your approved plan, because you already had an approved plan that you submitted years ago. And you can update that plan or amend it at any point in time. We will check on your individual elevation or acquisition, but we're trying to fix this programmatically because it's just another example of the federal government spending an extraordinary amount of time and money going through doing these analysis that when there's a much better way where it could be done. So Paul, let's make sure we get contact information. We'll figure out his exact address and see where FEMA is on approval. All right.
Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.